Habits shape your life in ways you rarely notice. They determine how you think, how you act, how you respond, and ultimately, who you become. The psychology behind habits is not about motivation or discipline. It's about understanding the invisible patterns that guide your behavior every single day. When you understand how habits work, you gain the ability to redesign your life from the inside out. Every habit you have, good or bad, follows a predictable psychological structure. Your brain is constantly scanning for cues, predicting rewards, and repeating behaviors that feel familiar or comforting. This process happens automatically without conscious effort. And that's the real power of habits. They run silently in the background, shaping your identity through repetition. The psychology of habits is not about forcing yourself to change. It's about learning how your mind naturally forms routines and then using that knowledge to your advantage. When you understand the mechanics behind habits, you stop relying on willpower. You stop fighting yourself. You stop trying to push through resistance. Instead, you learn how to work with your brain, not against it. The truth is simple. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And your systems are built from your habits. If you want to change your life, you don't start with ambition. You start with understanding. You start with awareness. You start with the psychology behind the behaviors you repeat every day. This video will take you inside the mind's habit-forming machinery. You'll learn why habits stick, why they fail, and how to build ones that last. You'll understand the hidden forces that shape your routines, the triggers that activate your behaviors, and the rewards that keep you repeating them. By the end, you'll see habits not as actions, but as a reflection of your identity and as tools you can intentionally design. Most people believe habits are about discipline. They think successful people simply have more willpower, more motivation, or more mental strength. But the truth is far simpler and far more powerful. The people who consistently follow good habits are not stronger. They are more aligned with how the brain actually works. They understand the psychology behind behavior, and they design their lives around it. Habits matter because they operate beneath awareness. You don't decide to check your phone. You don't decide to procrastinate. You don't decide to snack when you're stressed. These actions happen automatically because your brain is constantly trying to conserve energy. It wants to turn repeated behaviors into effortless routines. This is how the mind protects itself from overwhelm. It automates anything it can. This is why understanding the psychology of habits is essential. If you don't understand how habits form, you will continue fighting yourself. You will rely on motivation, which fades. You will rely on discipline, which drains. You will rely on inspiration, which disappears. And every time you fail, you will blame yourself instead of the system you're using. The real reason habits matter is because they shape identity. Every action you repeat becomes a vote for the type of person you believe you are. When you read every day, you start to see yourself as a reader. When you exercise consistently, you start to see yourself as someone who values health. When you write regularly, you start to see yourself as a creator. Identity is not built through intention. It is built through repetition. This is why small habits matter more than big goals. Goals create direction, but habits create identity. And identity creates long-term change. When you understand this, you stop chasing outcomes and start building systems. You stop trying to change everything at once and start changing one small behavior at a time. You stop trying to become someone new overnight and start becoming someone new through consistent action. Habits matter because they are the foundation of who you become. They are the invisible architecture of your life. And when you understand the psychology behind them, you gain the ability to reshape your identity, your routines, and your future. Every habit you have, whether helpful or harmful, follows a predictable psychological structure. This structure is not random. It is the brain's way of conserving energy, reducing uncertainty, and creating stability. When you understand this structure, you gain the ability to reshape your behavior at the deepest level. The psychology of habits can be reduced to a simple but powerful framework: cue, craving, response, and reward. These four elements form the loop that drives every repeated action in your life. The cue is the trigger that initiates the habit. It can be a time of day, a location, an emotion, a person, or even a thought. Cues are everywhere, and most of them operate beneath awareness. You don't notice the cue. You only notice the behavior that follows. But the cue is what starts the loop. A craving is the emotional or psychological desire that follows the cue. You don't crave the habit itself. You crave the state the habit creates. You don't crave scrolling your phone. You crave relief from boredom. You don't crave sugar. You crave comfort. You don't crave checking email. You crave certainty. Cravings are the engine of the habit loop. Without craving, there is no motivation to act. The response is the actual behavior, the habit you perform. This is the visible part of the loop, but it is not the most important part. The response is simply the action your brain has learned to associate with the cue and the craving. If the response is too difficult, you won't do it. If it's easy, you will. This is why small habits are so powerful. They remove friction and make the response effortless. The reward is the feeling you experience after the behavior. Rewards teach your brain what to repeat. They reinforce the loop. If the reward is satisfying, your brain learns to associate the cue with the craving and the craving with the response. Over time, the loop becomes automatic. This is how habits are formed, not through intention, but through repetition and reinforcement. The real insight is this: you don't change habits by fighting the loop. You change habits by redesigning the loop. Make the cue obvious. Make the craving attractive. Make the response easy. Make the reward satisfying. When you adjust these four elements, you reshape the psychological structure that drives your behavior. You stop relying on willpower and start relying on design. You stop forcing change and start engineering it. Understanding the psychology of habits is powerful, but it becomes transformative only when you apply it to your daily life. The goal is not to memorize the framework. The goal is to use it to redesign your routines, your environment, and your identity. When you apply the habit loop intentionally, you stop relying on motivation and start relying on structure. You stop hoping for change and start engineering it. The first step is to make your cues intentional. Most of your current cues are accidental. They were never chosen. They simply formed over time. If your phone is next to your bed, the cue to scroll is automatic. If snacks are on the counter, the cue to eat is automatic. If your workspace is cluttered, the cue to procrastinate is automatic. To build better habits, you must create better cues. Place the book on your pillow. Lay out your workout clothes. Put your journal on your desk. Make the cue visible, simple, and impossible to ignore. The second step is to make your cravings meaningful. A craving is not a desire for the habit itself. It is a desire for the feeling the habit creates. If you want to build a reading habit, connect it to curiosity or growth. If you want to exercise, connect it to energy or confidence. If you want to meditate, connect it to clarity or calm. When the emotional meaning behind the habit is strong, the craving becomes automatic. You no longer force yourself to act. You feel pulled toward the behavior. The third step is to make the response easy. This is where most people fail. They try to build habits that are too big, too complex, or too demanding. The brain resists anything that feels difficult. To build a habit that lasts, reduce the friction. Read 1 page. Write 1 sentence. Stretch for 1 minute. The goal is not to perform the habit perfectly. The goal is to show up consistently. Once the habit is established, you can scale it naturally. The fourth step is to make the reward satisfying. Your brain repeats what feels good. If the reward is delayed, abstract, or invisible, the habit will not stick. Celebrate small wins. Track your progress. Acknowledge your consistency. Reinforce the identity you are building. When the reward is immediate and meaningful, the habit becomes self-reinforcing. Applying the psychology of habits is not about changing everything at once. It is about changing 1 loop at a time. 1 cue, 1 craving, 1 response, 1 reward. When you apply this framework consistently, your habits stop being obstacles and start becoming tools. Tools that shape your identity. Tools that build your future. Tools that make change inevitable. The psychology of habits reveals a simple truth. Your life is shaped not by the goals you set, but by the behaviors you repeat. Every habit you build, every routine you follow, and every action you take is a small step toward the person you are becoming. Change does not happen through force. It happens through alignment. When your environment, your identity, and your systems support the behaviors you want, transformation becomes natural. You now understand the core structure behind every habit, the cue that triggers it, the craving that motivates it, the response that expresses it, and the reward that reinforces it. This loop is always running. It never stops. It never rests. It is the silent engine behind your daily life. And when you learn to redesign this loop, you gain the ability to reshape your behavior at its foundation. The real power of habit psychology is not in knowing the framework, but in applying it. When you make cues intentional, cravings meaningful, responses easy, and rewards satisfying, you create habits that last. You stop relying on motivation. You stop fighting resistance. You stop battling yourself. Instead, you build systems that make the behaviors you want feel natural, automatic, and inevitable. The psychology of habits is ultimately the psychology of identity. Every small action is a vote for the type of person you want to become. When you show up consistently, even in small ways, you reinforce a new story about yourself. You begin to trust your actions. You begin to trust your discipline. You begin to trust your ability to change. And that trust becomes the foundation for long-term transformation. If this breakdown helped you understand the deeper mechanics behind your behavior, subscribe to Book's Insights for more premium, minimalist explanations of the world's most important ideas. Explore our full library of psychology, productivity, and self-improvement frameworks. And if you're ready for the next step, watch our video on how to apply atomic habits in real life, a practical guide to turning this psychology into daily action.